Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here, and in this video we're going to go over what I think the Overrealm tier list is going to look like towards like the middle of the season and kind of talk about different builds. Now, I typically do not like tier list videos. I don't even really like making them because I think that there's a lot of opinion that go into making a tier list and not a lot of facts. And since in Torchlight we don't really have a lot of like APIs or ways to really look at like builds in terms of like how they're performing and stuff, it's very difficult to actually tell how well everything is performing. And so I kind of wanted to fix that in this video. But in order to kind of get to the Overrealm tier list, the first thing I needed to do was figure out exactly how builds did last season in Outlaw. And so what I decided to do is do the hard work of going out and figuring out how every build did last season, or at least each hero class. And how I did this was I went and I made a character on each seasonal realm. So I had one in NA, obviously. I made a character already in EU to make a loot filter with the sounds for everybody. And then I leveled up another character in Asia until I could see the leaderboards for hero ranking and for the Supreme Showdown. And I went and I did a lot of counting and put all the information together. And I learned quite a bit. There were some things I was actually quite surprised about that you might be surprised about. And I learned about some builds that I didn't even really know about all that much by doing this. Now, right off the bat, let's talk about the top 5 most played characters in each region. If you want to pause the video and tell me what you think the top 5 most played characters are for each region, we're going to go Asia, EU, NA. Feel free to type it down in the comments right now. And this is important to me because you really want to be able to tell what people are playing, because it's a good idea what people think is strong and what is powerful. And what I did here is I went out and I counted on hero rankings how many people by day 2 had hit level 95. Because I see this as kind of a good indicator that people are confident in their build. They're leveling past 90, and they're also, not dying a whole bunch, which means they're probably not pushing up to profound, maybe, but they are definitely just like able to muscle through to get to 95. And so in the Asia region, we have Thea 3 with 647 people hitting level 95 by day 2, Rosa 2, 286, Erica 1, Erica 2, and then I was shocked to see that Moto 2 was at a 161 players at 95. That was like 160 more people than I expected to count, because Moto 2 historically is kind of not something that's seen as a serious build, especially in NA. Basically nobody clears Supreme Showdown 20 on this. And so seeing Moto 2 up here was kind of an eye opener for me. It's like one of the first things that I was like, oh, wow, might be something like really here that I need to look into. Next up in Europe, we see a little bit of difference here. Erica 1 is number 1 by a large margin compared to how much she's in Asia. It's almost double the number of people who are playing that level 95. Thea 3 still way up there. Rosa 2 still right behind Thea 3. And then we had Gemma 2 sneaking into the top 5 with Erica 2 rounding it out. And Gemma 2 is like not as much played in NA, especially, or even in Asia compared to Europe. So rather interesting to see it pop off so much here. Now, I'm sure you can guess what are going to be some of the top here in America, but I was rather surprised to see that Rosa was way more popular relatively in America compared to any other region, with 198 to Thea 3's 78, then Erica 2, then Selena makes an appearance, and Erica 1. So obviously the most popular characters are Thea 3, Rosa 2, and the Ericas, with 1 in each region. And I felt that this was pretty important because you want to have a good idea of what people are playing and what kind of builds are out there. And so this is what it looked like across all the different classes for 95s at day 2 by class. You can kind of see that there's like quite a big distribution here, with Thea 3 being overwhelmingly popular. Now Thea 3 is getting a little bit nerfed this next season, but also still pretty ridiculously strong. So I think she'll be fine, but it is really crazy to see this by a chart. Now, I realize that leveling up to 95 really isn't like kind of the end game, isn't what people really care about. So the next thing I went and did is I counted all of the people that killed Supreme Showdown 20 or higher. Now, there is kind of a limit to this because you can only see up to 100 kills per region, unlike in hero rankings where I can just continuously scroll down and count. So you can only see 100 more, but very few characters actually had 100 plus. And so Supreme Showdown 20 kills by class. Rosa 2 in all 3 regions had 100 plus kills. Thea 3 in 2 of the regions, EU and Asia, had 100 plus. And then we had some 100 pluses in some of the other characters like Gemma. And we actually almost had Moto 2. Almost all of his kills were in Asia, like 97, I believe. And this is absolutely crazy, kind of the distribution here. I thought it would be really interesting to see, though, because we know that like Rosa has a lot of people clearing, Thea 3 has a lot of people clearing, but like what is the ratio between people who were playing the character early in the season and actually followed through and killed down Supreme Showdown 20? And because I typically want to play a build where I just play the character all the way through. I don't necessarily need to pivot. I can play a strong build from start to finish. I consider that to be like a very solid, well-rounded character. So I went out and I did the math for the characters that had the best ratio of most number of kills compared to the number of people who were playing it at the start of the season. And right off the bat, you see something really weird, which is the fact that there were only 2 level 95 Karina 1s, but then we had 34 Supreme Showdown kills. And this was mostly due to a Wilt build that kind of popped off kind of like late season. And so pretty much nobody was playing it right off the bat, but a lot of people picked it up later in the season. And that was pretty much carrying almost all of these kills here. And so unfortunately, Karina 1 is so high up there, like 1700%, that kind of makes the rest of the chart look a little silly. So we're just going to knock him out of the chart. And now we're just going to see with no Karina 1. And we can see that like Rayhan 2 is really popping off. Rosa 1's really popping off. Gemma 1 had an absolute ton of people. Although Gemma 1 seemed to have a lot of very suspect people with 2 mirror weapons, a like eternity, and a whole bunch of other just crazy gear by like week 2 or week 3. So yeah, I don't really know all that much about Gemma 1 there, but the rest of the classes I feel like had some pretty good distribution with reasonable levels of gear. And one thing to note is that the classes like Thea 3 and Rosa 1, who have, you know, more than 100 kills in a lot of the regions, are going to look worse than they actually are. But like Rosa 2 having like 71%, that should probably be like a lot higher. Same thing with Thea. And so I went out and I applied my patented proprietary Don's weighting measurement system to end up with a total tier list that considers characters that are good early game for leveling to 95 by day 2, killing Supreme Showdown, and adding a little bit of extra weight to the classes that were able to kill more Supreme Showdowns than you would expect based on how many people are playing it early game. And before we do that, though, we'll talk about the calendar. So this is pretty much the order in which I believe that people killed Supreme Showdown. It's kind of a problem to actually track this, because if, like, for example, somebody killed Supreme Showdown 20 earlier than this on Selena, like let's say they killed it on the 26th of July, but then that same guy goes and kills Supreme Showdown 21 like a week later, it updates his most recent time to that. So we don't actually get to see the actual 20 days, but we can see like kind of the breakdown of the classes with Carino 3 back here and Iris 1 basically being the final classes to cross that like breakpoint there. And pretty much Asia took most of the first kills, with NA and EU splitting the remainder. And it was pretty crazy to see some of these builds and some of these like gear that people were able to slap together in the first 2 weeks. But definitely like everything's relatively close to one another. I don't really feel like this is like a super huge gap. Even there's like a 2 week gap between Rosa 2 and Carino 3. I mean, Rosa 2 is super duper popular and super duper powerful, so it's not really all that big of a deal. Now, this is what I think that the overall tier list is going to look like for Outlaw season. If we go and we talk about the proprietary weighting, I put a weight on all of those different metrics that we've talked about so far, except for the calendar, because I don't really think that really matters all that much. But this is pretty much the breakdown. And I don't really like doing like S tier, B tier, A tier, whatever, F tier, because I feel like a lot of that kind of loses some of the nuance. Like if you see something like a tier list, and it's like S tier is all these, and then everything else is trash. But I don't really think that's the case here. The top tier here is powerful and popular. These are builds that cleared over 100 kills and, in Supreme Showdown 20. And some of these builds, cleared, multiple regions with plus 100, and just overall just very, very powerful builds. And yeah, even some of these had different build archetypes that were going for it. Like Rosa had not just the mana stacking, but Trinity also had the like aura stacking, mana stacking type of build, which is pretty cool. And I still think that pretty much all of these like definitely fall into this category. Still good. These characters are still good. These guys still clear Supreme Showdown 20. They have strong starts this particular season of Outlaw, and they are just, overall good characters. Just because they're not in the powerful and popular is maybe more because they're not popular than powerful. Now in the less played category, some of these are a little bit less powerful, a little bit less played. Yuga 1, for example, here, Gemma 2. Gemma 2 is like really unplayed in some regions and very popular in other regions. Like it's one of the most popular characters in Europe, but then pretty much not played other places. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. Rosa, Rayhan 1 kind of got a lot of nerfs this season, and then Yuga 2. And then really the off-meta guys, these guys can kind of cross the finish line for Supreme Showdown. They kind of have some good starters, but it's a little bit rougher to do. And generally, they might have something in their kit that makes it a little bit annoying to play the character. And so all of these guys like Bing, Carino, Moto 1, Iris 1, Carino 2, and Carino 3, they're still reasonable. They're okay to play, but they, a little bit rough. And the very bottom here, we have the ladies Thea 1 and 2. Apparently Thea 3 got all of the good clears and, early starts, because both Thea 1 and 2 have just been horrible. Between the two of them, they barely cleared any Supreme Showdowns across all the regions. And they really just kind of like need like a cool build that really fits them. It doesn't really seem like there's a build right now that is like the Thea 1 build that like works better on her than any other class, and same thing with Thea 2, and maybe we'll see that in the future, but it's kind of just like disappointing right now. And so next up, if we have what we think Outlaw was for that season, we need to talk about the nerfs and the buffs. Now I kind of like, this is kind of where my opinion comes in a little bit. And like, I don't necessarily know all the different builds that are going to be getting affected by all the patches, because, I just can't keep in my head like 50 plus builds. And we don't necessarily know exactly how some of these things are going to interact and work, or how popular or how like available some things are going to be. But I do feel like this is a good general breakdown. And just because like these guys are up here and buffed doesn't necessarily mean they're like super duper buffed. I just think that they came out more ahead in the end game than they did lose stuff. So Thea 3, and pretty much everybody, by the way, has lost candles, and losing candles is kind of a pain. You could almost say that everybody's been nerfed in a way because of that. But I do think Thea 3, Yuga 2, and Carino 2 are kind of the characters they typically are doing erosion damage with. You're typically doing damage over time with. And there are just way too many crazy prisms that could potentially be used on these classes to find different builds that could see these guys getting a buff to their overall builds from these. Erica 2 definitely got, I think, a little bit of a buff this season. They pretty much made it so that conductivity with numbed makes it so that it's more lightning damage focused, which Erica 2 is all about. So really it just kind of helped her get her like numbed identity to be more her thing, as opposed to being picked up by everybody else, which I think is a good thing. Gemma 3, her Firebird amulet, pretty much got like an upgrade. You also got another legendary that you can put on to help you kind of get that build going sooner. So I could really see that build popping off a lot this season. And there's even like a spell burst version of that build, which maybe could be played by Gemma 3 or maybe other characters as well. But I could see that as being very popular. And Gemma 3 has just been relatively strong and like will benefit from a lot of different things. Yuga 1 can be a spell burst character. Spell burst got a lot of love. Moto 1, there's a prism that can give them up to like maybe 300% more damage. I think that could be pretty ridiculous. Both Iris 2 and Iris 1 didn't really get a big amount of buffs, but they pretty much had an issue where they had some like really good early game legendaries, and then they had to go buy a 20,000 FE pair of gloves. So some of the new stuff is kind of like going to help bridge the gap there, I think, a little bit. So they're not necessarily having to go get miniature Void Sea in order to get some more power. There's some more options in their build progression, but even then, like Iris 2 is still pretty darn strong. And then in the OK category here, Rosa 2 definitely did get a little nerfed, but you know, she does benefit from some of the changes actually to sequence. She's one of the few characters that actually picks up a buff from sequences, and just think it's going to be pretty cool. Bing, I think that some of his one build did get nerfed, but he still also picks up a few buffs. Same thing with Carino. He got some of his ammo stuff fixed up. Erica 1, she got like some of her multi-strike stuff removed from some weapon bases, but some of that doesn't matter. And just in general, she's just a very strong character. And then Rayhan 2 pretty much got some of his builds seemingly gutted. Like they destroyed the chest armor that they used for the build. They destroyed one of his traits, although that did kind of fix his Supreme Showdown immunity phase issues. If you don't know, basically he's just consuming his life nonstop. And if you're not able to hit anything, you wouldn't be able to recuperate your life, and you just self-terminate, and it was pretty bad. So maybe this is going to be not as big of a nerf as we see here right off the bat, but I've seen a lot of people saying that Rayhan 2 is like dead, but I think it will still be fine. Gemma 1 got a little bit of a nerf, definitely loses one of her main talents that she normally likes. And then Selena 1, likewise with anybody who's doing a channeling build like Thea, like maybe Yuga 2, channeling like lost like candles, we're getting channels. You're also losing +1 channel on your main talents. There's not like any one of the prisms that like really stand out to me for Selena, except for like maybe like the spell stacking type of one, which could be good. And then the rest of the classes, including the Thea 2 that's behind me, didn't really necessarily get anything that I felt like was an overwhelmingly positive buff for them. I mean, Rayhan 1 could maybe get some bonuses here from strength stacking, but I didn't really feel like it was enough to really move the meter. And so with all of that, we come to the tier list. And come to the tier list. Imagine getting 17 minutes into your presentation and realizing that your final slide got deleted. So yeah, I had to remake this real quick after pausing the video. So this is pretty much what I think the tier list is going to look like at the end of Overrealm. And some of this, like I'm probably going to be missing some of these here, but I do think that Bing 2 is going to be really, really strong and really popular. Spell burst meta has always just been pretty strong, and they definitely got some buffs to him, or buffs to that particular archetype. And I just think that Bing seems like it has a ton of different builds, which the more builds that you have that can possibly work for the build can kind of like maybe distract people from finding like the one true golden path to Supreme Showdown 20, but also having more than one skill that can kill the fight means that there's going to be more different ways to like actually make it there, and it potentially will be a cheaper character than like some other ones. And then of course, Erica 2, Erica 1, Rosa 2, Thea 3. I think these are all going to stay in the top 5 pretty much for every region. I wouldn't be surprised to see them up there. We might see like one of these drop out of the top 5 out of some of the regions. I'm sure that Bing 2 is still gonna be really popular, but yeah, these are just, I think, pretty standard ones. They do kind of get hurt a little bit from the defenses loss from candles, but maybe we're just going to pick that up with a defensive prism instead. We're picking up with an offensive prism and then going and getting more defenses some other place. Gemma 3, Gemma 1. I think these builds are going to be still very, very good, very powerful. Even though Gemma 1 technically got a little bit of a nerf, I think people are still going to be wailing out on it like crazy. Yuga 1 definitely up a little bit from all the spell burst buffs. Moto 2, I think even though he didn't really get any changes, I'm not even sure if any of the prisms really work really well for him. I think the Dark Gate one probably does, which is probably helpful. He's just a really strong character. I actually just today went and did a 85-minute campaign run on Moto 2. He is super smooth. I didn't even need to like use any sort of a power skill or curse pretty much for the entire run until the very end where it was, killing the final bosses. And it's just super duper easy early game. I think there's still some issues with Moto 2 and even with Moto 1 especially, but I think this very, very solid character. And the only reason I'm really talking about him so much is because I always see people hating on him so much, especially in pretty much every region outside of Asia. And it's because we don't see like any SS20 clears. Iris 2, I think is still very, very strong. Like I said, it has a little bit of a smoother path possibly, and some of those prisms could potentially be quite interesting for her. Gemma 2, I still think is really criminally underplayed. Very strong character. My boy Marty is always blasting off of Gemma 2, and then, you know, I don't see other people really popping off in the same way. And so I really hope that this character maybe gets a little bit more action in the future, and we'll see what happens with that. Rosa 1, I think could potentially actually even do better than I'm showing her here. I think that like the armor stacking meta, which is something that Rosa has done before, could potentially come back in full swing this season. So we'll have to see about that. Selena's kind of dropped down for me a little bit simply because, you know, she lost all that channeling stuff, but, you know, could still be potentially pretty good. She's a really, really fast campaign. She does, you know, gets into like tier 8 pretty fast as well, and does a good job of farming up. So I think this is going to be an okay character. Yuga 2, I think is still pretty strong. Right Hand 2, definitely down a lot farther than he was before, but I think that he has definitely some potential to pop off with some of the new stuff. Right Hand 1 also I think has some potential as well. And then we kind of just finish up with like Bing. I think necessarily hasn't changed too much. Moto 1 definitely popped up a little bit, but I still think he has a lot of issues necessarily with his whole kit. Karina 2, I just kind of find to be clunky to play. Iris 1 just kind of is in a rough spot right now. Carino 1, Carino 3, both of these guys just like still have kind of issues, and it kind of doesn't feel like they have a build for them just yet. Maybe this will be the season where they surprise us. And then I don't think that Thea 1 and 2 are going to make it out of the don't play this tier yet. Hopefully, if you're watching this and you're a big Thea 1 or 2 fan, you prove me wrong. You come out with some sort of awesome build that's specifically for them. But just hasn't happened yet. And Thea 1 is like actually one of my favorite characters. The first character I think that I really hit the true damage cap on. And yeah, I would love to see a good character for this. Now, this is not really the end for me, because I'm going to be making a video where we go and we talk about like the best starters, because even though this is like a tier list of what I think the most powerful everything is going to be, I still want to do some very specific examples of what I think like the top 5 starters are. So keep your eyes out on that. If you like this type of content, let me know in the comments down below. I try to put a little bit more effort into this because, you know, I don't typically like doing tier list videos because I kind of feel like they're, you know, not scientific. So I try to add a little bit of science to this. Do you think that the tracking by day 2 level 95 is good? Do you think that tracking by Supreme Showdown kills and the ratio between them was good? What other stats should we potentially look at in the future? And unfortunately, like I don't have any access to the Chinese realm, so I don't have the ability to see what the stats are there. Hopefully this video helped you out. We'll see you guys again soon, and come by the stream.